Hello and welcome to Chapter 12, Anesthesia, Lecture Part 2. We're going to be talking about the anesthesia formula. Okay, now I want to tell you guys that I am going to be giving you the slides. I'm going to be giving you the information, but I want you to be patient because after I get done giving you the slides and talking about the information, I'm going to show you a video where a lady is actually going to calculate anesthesia fees for you. So you can actually have the information and then you're going to be able to see someone put it into action. So without further ado, we're going to do the rest of our slides. Okay, anesthesia formula. The CPT codes for anesthesia services include preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative care. Anesthesia services are billed according to a standard formula for payment that is generally accepted throughout the United States. The formula is base units plus time units plus modifying units times conversion factors. Now we're going to break these things down a little bit. B plus T plus M. Base units plus time units plus modifying units. So we're going to start with B. B is for base unit. The base units are published in the RVG, Relative Value Guide, by the ASA. So what does ASA stand for? It stands for the American Society of Anesthesiology. So here you're going to find national unit values for anesthesia services. It's based on complexity, and base unit value will often be referred to as the BUV. The Relative Value Guide, the RVG, contains codes for anesthesia services, most of which are included in the anesthesia section of the CPT. The purpose of the RVG is to compare the complexity of various anesthesia services so that a relative value of each service, when compared with all services, may be assigned the basic unit value for a service that is this RVG value. Now, when you start talking about, comparing things, you have to realize the more complex is always going to be higher value than something that's very simple. So just thinking about the types of anesthesia, if you are doing something that's local, then the complexity is not very high. But, when you do general surgeries in general anesthesia, then your complexity actually raises. So it wouldn't be fair to charge the same thing for a local as you do a general. So this RVG is used to compare the complexity and all the different CPT codes and all the different levels of complexity. So that is what this relative value guide does. It just compares prices. So here's a relative value guide. Base unit values assigned to each code. This is figure 12.8 in your textbook. So let's just take a look at CPT code 00100. If we open up our CPT book and we open up to that CPT code, and let's do that now. I'm opening my book to actually read the description of 00100. There we go. Anesthesia for procedures on salivary glands, including biopsy. So that base value unit is going to be 5. So 00102, what is 00102? Anesthesia for procedures involving plastic repair of cleft lip. And it goes so on and so forth. 00102 is higher than 00100. Well, let's look at what the value of 4 is. That 00104, what is that? Anesthesia for electroconvulsive therapy. So it has less than 0.3, which is reconstructive procedures of the eyelid. So you can see how they base the units on complexity. Let's look at the highest on this list, which is 00210. 00210 is anesthesia for intracranial procedures not otherwise specified. So that is anesthesia for do anything on the cranium. So when you're talking about the brain and the skull, that's very complex. So hopefully just looking at this guide, you can understand that, they're looking at the complexity and they're basing the value unit upon the complexity. And again, you can find this value guide in your textbook. It's figure 12.8. T is for time. Time is measured from the beginning of the preoperative period, when the time is spent preparing the patient to receive anesthesia, through the time when the patient ceases to be under the care of the anesthesiologist during the postoperative period. This time is recorded in the patient's record. The amount of time represented by a unit varies from different carriers, but typically will be 15 or 30 minutes. The patient record indicates the time, for example, 15, 30, 60 minutes. Often 15 minutes is 1 unit, so therefore 60 minutes would be 4 units. So let's recap. Anesthesiologist begins to manage a patient in the operating room, pre-op, continues throughout the procedure, intra-op, ends patient no longer under care of the anesthesiologist, which is post-op. For example, anesthesia time started at 9 a.m. and the patient discharged the PACU at 1:30 p.m. That would be 270 minutes. So what does PACU stand for? Post Anesthesia Care Unit. M is for modifying unit. Modifying units reflect circumstances or conditions that change the environment in which the anesthesia service is provided. Physical status modifiers are an indicator of the level of complexity of the services required to treat that patient. Physical condition is indicated by physical status modifiers P1 through P6. You can find these in the anesthesia guidelines. Risk factor, and these are not reported for Medicare. So I want you to take your CPT. I want you to open up to where your modifiers are. Remember, that's on the very back cover, the front cover of your CPT manual. Look on the back of the front cover. And you have your symbols and you have your first list. Look in the second column, the very top, anesthesia, physical status modifiers. You can find these in your anesthesia guidelines, but you can also find them by your modifiers. So what are P1 through P6? Okay, so P1 is a normal, healthy patient. P2, mild systemic disease. P3, severe systemic disease. P4, severe systemic disease and inconstant threat to life. P5, not expected to survive without the operation, and P6 is brain dead. So those are what your physical status modifiers mean. Now we're going to talk about qualifying circumstance codes and relative value. So these are going to be listed in addition to your primary anesthesia code. These are called qualifying circumstance codes. Now, if you look, I'm sorry, I'm going to find these. I'm actually looking You can find these in your guidelines. I am in the 2020 CPT. It's on page 61. And you can see it on page 61. It says qualifying circumstances. And 99100, you see there's a plus sign in front of all of these CPT codes, which means this is an add-on code. You cannot use these by themselves. But let's just see what they say. 99100 is anesthesia for a patient of extreme age, younger than 1 year and older than 70. It lists separately in addition to code for primary anesthesia procedure. So these are going to be qualifying circumstances. You need to read through these and make notes. So when you're reading your scenarios, you're going to stop and think, do I need that extra CPT code? And again, these are found in your anesthesia guidelines. So let's do a summation of the formula. Base units are based on CPT code. Time units is based on your time. Modifiers are qualifying circumstances. B plus T plus M equals total of units times your conversion factor equals your payment. So here we get to conversion factor. You're going to be able to see this in figure 1213 in your step-by-step manual. And this is the 2019 CMS anesthesia conversion factor. So let's look at that. So the locality name, Manhattan, New York. Anesthesia conversion factor is 24.65. New York City and Long Island, 25.27. Queens, New York, 25.40. The rest of New York, 21.55. North Carolina, 21.62. And North Dakota, 21.65. So if you go back and you see we're doing the summation formula, look at the very bottom, B plus T plus M equals your total units times your conversion factor. So if you were in North Dakota, you would times that number times 1.65, and that gets how much you're going to bill out. So I want to talk about some Hicks Picks modifiers. Now you can find these in Hicks Picks, and I don't have my Hicks Picks manual out to tell you what page, but they are in your Hicks Picks. Hopefully that you actually labeled your modifiers in your Hicks Picks so that you can go and look for these. But you're going to have AA, anesthesia by anesthesiologist, and they go all the way down. So you need to pull out your Hicks Picks and make sure that your modifiers are labeled in your Hicks Picks for anesthesia. I was looking to see on our modifiers in our CPT if we actually had those, and we don't on the front cover. I'm sure there are some listed in modifiers in the back of your CPT, but honestly, you can just keep your Hicks Picks handy and you can look at your modifiers there. Okay, so that's all of our slides. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do a little video. So I'm going to share my screen and show you that. Well, if it will let me escape. All right, here we go.
All right, so what we're going to talk about is how to calculate anesthesia fees. When we start calculating anesthesia fees, what we need to, it's a very simple calculation where we take the total units of the and we multiply that by our conversion factor. What we have to calculate first is what our total units are, and there's several different things that go into that. Every single CPT code or every single anesthesia CPT code has its own basic value that's been assigned to it. There is a table that shows you what those anesthesia codes are in the back of your book, and you'll look up the code there. Then we look at time units. A time unit is based off of 15 minutes. How long was the patient under anesthesia? Then we have to look at the patient's physical status. We know that we have P1 through P5, and based off of the patient's physical status, we'll determine what P code they have. Not all P codes will have a value placed to it. Then we have the qualifying circumstance. Those are the qualifying circumstance codes, and those have also been assigned a base unit or a base value based off of what that particular code is. So when we can figure that all up, then we can go ahead and take our conversion factor, which is given to us by CMS, and it is based off of the locale what that conversion factor is. So let's start with an 86-year-old gentleman who was placed under anesthesia for 30 minutes. So there's our time unit. So he was placed under anesthesia for 30 minutes. And we know that our units for that is calculated at 15 minutes per unit. So if we were under anesthesia for 30 minutes, that's going to give us 2 units. The code that was charged by the anesthesiologist was 00300. And we know that that basic value for 00300 is 5 because we found that in our appendix. Also, the patient recently had an MI. So because he had an MI, the physician said that he had a physical status of a P3, which means that the patient has severe systemic disease. Because he has severe systemic disease, that we can add another base unit value to that. Then we also look at this qualifying circumstance. Because our patient is over 70 years old, he's 86 years of age, we can use 99100, which means that we have a patient of extreme age. That also gives us another unit. So now, once I have found these 4 things, I can now add up how many total units that we are going to multiply our conversion factor by. So 5 plus 2 plus 1 and 1 gives us 9. So I have a total units of 9. So my conversion factor, because this patient was in Birmingham, Alabama, and we look at our graph, tells us that our conversion factor is 21.37. So what I simply need to do is take my conversion factor of 21.37. I'm going to multiply it by the total units that I calculated for my patient, and when I do that, I come up with $192.33. So the fee that the anesthesiologist will charge the patient for being under anesthesia for 30 minutes with a CPT code of 00300 is $192.33.
Okay, so hopefully seeing her work that problem and hearing all the information kind of gave, oh my goodness, I do not, hang on. I think that our YouTube
or explicit or excellent or
sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. That was YouTube, went to the next video. What I was saying is hopefully taking those words and seeing it into action will give you a little bit better of a clue on how these things are going to work. Please note that all of your guides are actually in your textbook for you to use to do any of your scenarios that may come up. Hopefully that you enjoyed this, and hopefully do not overthink it. I know it sounds like, oh my goodness, this is so hard, but it's really not hard. And remember, the only time that you're going to have to get real serious about this formula if you're actually coding anesthesia or billing anesthesia. So just do the best you can, read the information, and if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. Have a great day.